Welcome back, everyone. Let's jump right in because today I am incredibly excited to announce Lesson 3 of our ongoing Explainer series. We're diving into a genuinely fascinating conceptual framework, the courts of heaven and the divine jurisprudence. According to our source material, the spiritual realm isn't just, floating clouds and abstract concepts. Not at all. It actually operates under a supreme, highly structured and rigid legal system. So, here's our court docket for today. Think of this as your strict itinerary to help you understand your legal standing as a kingdom citizen. First up, welcome to the Supreme Court. Second, the prosecutor's indictments. Third, kingdom policy and conditional obedience. Fourth, the perfect defense attorney. And finally, filing a heavenly injunction. All right, Section 1. Welcome to the Supreme Court, understanding the supreme jurisdiction of the universe. The foundation of this entire system rests completely on spiritual laws. The text defines these as divine principles and commandments that govern everything: heaven, earth, time, space, the whole shebang. Think about the law of gravity for a second. It strictly governs the physical universe, right? Well, according to our documents, spiritual laws carry even more weight and binding power than physical ones. They are absolutely inescapable, neutral rules that dictate outcomes, and they can be leveraged for both good and evil depending on who's actually using them.
Moving on to Section 2, the prosecutor's indictments. How the enemy gains legal access.
Now, if there's a court, it makes sense that there are officers of the court, right? Our source documents identify Satan not as some pitchfork-wielding cartoon monster, but operating in a very specific tactical legal role, the Chief Prosecutor. And his primary job? He is actively building a case against you. He and his agents are constantly gathering physical and spiritual evidence. They're tracking your words, your actions, even your generational history. What they're really hunting for is unacknowledged sin. You see, unconfessed sin creates a literal contractual agreement, granting the prosecutor legal access. He takes that evidence, establishes cause, submits formal indictments, and ultimately pushes for a legal judgment of death. To really grasp this legal system, we have to distinguish between two incredibly important terms: prosecute versus persecute. On one hand, you are prosecuted by the chief prosecutor in a formal legal setting because of actual unconfessed sin. It's a penalty for breaking a law. On the flip side, being persecuted is targeted demonic mistreatment specifically because of your identity as a kingdom citizen. So one is a strict legal proceeding based on wrongdoing, while the other is just straight-up harassment for your beliefs. Which brings us to Section 3, Kingdom Policy, Conditional Obedience. The precedence of the king. Throughout these documents, the King James Version of the Bible is strictly and consistently referred to as kingdom policy. It is the definitive, codified legal standard used in this Supreme Court. Looking directly at kingdom policy, specifically Deuteronomy 28:1, notice the massive emphasis on the word if thou shalt hearken diligently. The sources make it crystal clear: blessings and heavenly protection are absolutely not automatic. They are strictly conditional upon your diligent obedience. You have to willingly choose to align with the king's laws if you want to receive the king's benefits. And the ultimate reward for that obedience is found in the Zechariah 3:1-7 precedent of kingdom policy. The text declares, "If thou wilt walk in my ways, then thou shalt also judge my house." So the real takeaway here, walking in conditional obedience doesn't just keep you out of trouble, it grants you actual legal standing. It elevates you, the kingdom citizen, to operate as a judge, partnering directly with the divine system.
But let's be real. What happens when the chief prosecutor brings forward ironclad historical indictments against you? That leads us straight into Section 4, the perfect defense attorney. Overruling the indictments.
The sources actually provide an ultimate defense strategy, and it all hinges on the law of substitution. This is defined as a cornerstone spiritual law where one person, object, or value is legally replaced with another of equal or greater value. The documents explain that at the cross, this specific law was perfectly executed. The penalty and the heavy indictments that we owed were legally swapped out and completely replaced by a higher value. So this sets the stage for the ultimate courtroom showdown. You've got the chief prosecutor enforcing the law of sin and death, aggressively demanding a guilty verdict based on cold, hard facts. But here is where the sources introduce King Jesus, operating specifically in the role of our perfect defense attorney. Because of the law of substitution, he has the legal liberty to step in and literally swap out those deadly indictments, replacing them with his supreme, unmerited grace. He enforces a higher law that legally overwrites every single one of the prosecution's claims. It's brilliant. Section 5. Filing a heavenly injunction.
restraining the prosecutor's actions.
Now that we know who our defense attorney is, how do we actively utilize this court to stop the enemy's attacks? Well, before you file any paperwork, you absolutely must pass the law of clean hands. Think about physical jurisprudence. You can't walk into a court seeking equitable relief if you're actively committing fraud yourself, right? The Heavenly Court operates the exact same way. Before filing an injunction, there can be zero unconfessed sin in your life. Otherwise, the prosecutor still holds legal leverage to block your petition right out of the gate.
Once your hands are clean, the texts outline a very clear three-step judicial process for filing your injunction. Step 1 is the petition, which is centered entirely on repentance. Step 2 is filing the petition, where you present your sworn statement of facts directly to the judge. And Step 3 is closing with worship, which acts as your unified agreement with the King's heart.
Let's focus on Step 1 for a second, because it is arguably the most critical phase. To file this successfully, you have to engage in formal, verbalized repentance. This isn't just about sitting there feeling sorry, it is a strict legal necessity. By formally confessing personal disobedience, generational iniquities, or even national lies, you are legally severing any hidden contracts with what the text calls the monster sin. That confession shatters the agreement and instantly strips the chief prosecutor of all his legal standing in your case.
With that contract legally broken, you now lean entirely on kingdom policy. Look at Galatians 3:13-14. We see that your petition rests solely on the legal work of your defense attorney. Because Christ was made a curse for us, he effectively bought out our debt. When you rest your case on this specific precedent, it allows the Supreme Court to issue a sweeping decree of complete justification.
So what does this all mean? Why does any of this matter to us right now? Well, according to our source documents, a heavenly injunction doesn't just make you feel a bit better spiritually. When a righteous, legally sound petition is actually ruled upon by the Supreme Appellate Court of Heaven, those impacts manifest physically here on earth. The texts provide historical precedents showing that these divine rulings have literally neutralized physical threats, disbanded corrupt systems, and permanently rewritten earthly legislation. That is the kind of power we're talking about here.
We've navigated an incredibly intricate, fascinating legal system today. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a direct, provocative question to think about. Is your current legal standing truly secure in the Supreme Court of Heaven? Are your hands actually clean, and is your perfect defense attorney retained? It's a profound paradigm to consider as you examine your own heart posture this week. Thank you so much for joining me for Lesson 3, and keep seeking understanding.